Chairman Han, is a powerful businessman in technology XPM, one of the major technology companies in the country. His public image is spotless, a self-made man and philanthropist. He has quietly leveraged his wealth to ensure advantages for himself and his company. Chairman Han tosses the phone while calling his assistant, and yelling at the top of his voice. "Anyone messes with me will be put down to rest. Go check where those anonymous messages are coming from." In the auditorium of All Saints High, a school assembly begins. On stage, the headmaster is praising the star student, Hyun, for her academic excellence and charity work. Applause fills the room, but Hyun's expression falters as she glances at her phone. A new anonymous message pops up on the school's internal app. "Hyun is a fraud. I know what you did." Hyun is Chairman Han's only daughter. She has no mother because she died when she was little, and her relationship with her father is very bad, so she spends most of her time alone or with the help. She has been receiving anonymous texts for at least a week, and she doesn't know what to do. Eun Woo is a scholarship student. He grew up in a tiny apartment in Seoul, raised by his mother, Seo-young, a kind but overworked woman who works multiple part-time jobs to support them. Despite their struggles, Seo-young instilled in Eun Woo a sense of integrity and resilience. His father was never in the picture, and Seo-young rarely talks about her past. All Eun Woo knows is that his mother once dreamed of becoming an artist but gave it up when she had him. Eun Woo is a quiet and tech-savvy student, as he watches the assembly. He notices Jihyun's unease but doesn't think much of it, until later that day, when the school bulletin is hacked, and a torrent of humiliating posts about Jihyun floods every student's phone. The following day, after the cyberbullying posts escalate, Jihyun arrived at school only to have eggs thrown at her, and everyone making fun of her. Somehow she manages to get to her classroom. The atmosphere in the classroom changes drastically. Just the day before everyone will bow treating her like royalty, but today everything has changed. The gossip. Groups of students whisper loudly about Jihyun, casting glances her way. Someone drops a note on her desk, and when she unfolds it, it's a crude drawing mocking her. She crumples it and tries to focus, but her hands shake slightly. Eun Woo arrived late to class. He slept in and was sent to the direction there. He overheard a very strange conversation between his homeroom teacher and his biology teacher. They were talking about the administrative board. He couldn't stay any longer because as soon as they saw he was listening, he was sent to his classroom. When he arrived it was chaos. Jihyun was the center of attention. Mean girls were pulling pranks on her. He notices everything but hesitates to intervene. Instead, he sends her a discreet text. "Don't let them win." Jihyun looks around, trying to figure out who sent it, and their eyes briefly meet. Mr. Kim, the homeroom teacher, walks in the classroom and awkwardly tries to address the situation, giving a generic speech about cyberbullying, but it's clear he's too intimidated by the social dynamics to truly step in. Kids were excessively cruel to Jihyun since humiliating posts about Jihyun kept flooding every student's phone. Jihyun breaks down in tears during a school-wide meeting, begging the cyberbully to stop. Eun Woo realizes this is more than a prank, it's personal. Eun Woo walks up to Jihyun and drags her out of the classroom and the school. Together they sat quietly until Jihyun turned around and said thank you. He looked at her and smiled, saying, "I'm older than you, speak to me with respect." She burst out laughing. "Only 7 months, that's not so old." Undercovering who is behind the messages. Eun Woo starts by analyzing the messages targeting Jihyun. Using his hacking skills, he traces the source of the anonymous posts to an encrypted account, but something feels off. There are signs the account belongs to a teacher, not a student. This discovery makes him hesitant. Accusing an authority figure could backfire. Their investigation leads them to discover that Jihyun's father, a prominent businessman, had quietly donated large sums to the school in exchange for favors. While Jihyun is unaware of these dealings, the headmaster and other key figures in the school administration benefited. The anonymous messages are part of a campaign to ruin Jihyun's reputation, but the real question is, who wants her father's secrets exposed, and why? They find out that multiple students' families have made similar deals with the school, and one of them was denied their favor, sparking resentment. A former teacher, fired under mysterious circumstances, seems to be involved. This teacher had accused the school of unethical practices before disappearing. Eun Woo tells Ji-hyun that they have to check the principal's computer, which is offline since he uses a personal laptop, and that will be difficult to access. That night they met up and got as far as the principal's office, but the door was locked and they were almost discovered by a guard. Eun Woo sent Ji-hyun back and stayed awaiting for the guard to fall asleep to steal his keys. He got the keys, and while in the principal's office he found an external drive, photos, and a folder dated 31 years back. He just took everything, put it in his backpack, and left. Eun Woo and Ji-hyun arrived to school the next morning only to find out that the principal had a special assembly at school talking about the bulletin hacked messages and also about how offices from the school building had been searched by a group of thieves which left with important school assets. As Ji-hyun's social status crumbles as students turn against her, believing the accusations, they race against time to find a cryptic clue left by the former teacher, a flash drive hidden in a dusty library book. It contains evidence of the headmaster's corruption, including forged documents and hidden recordings. But the files are heavily encrypted, and Eun Woo must find a way to crack them without being caught. Eun Woo receives a warning: his computer is hacked, and someone plants incriminating files on it, framing him as the cyberbully. The school board gets involved, and the headmaster threatens to expel Ji-hyun and Eun Woo if the situation escalates further. Later that night, Eun Woo arrives home. His mother, in the tiny balcony of their apartment, looks at him with worry on her face. She asked him what was he doing messing with the school board. Before he could even reply, she showed him a note that she received stating that they will have to pay full tuition because his grades had dropped. He looked at her but couldn't tell her what was going on. She continued talking. "I know you didn't want to go to that school. But please take advantage of it and learn, because either way we are going to have to pay for the year's tuition." He hugged his mom as he always did since he was little. His mother had never wanted to talk about his father, and she had brought him up all on her own. She smiled and said, "Okay, enough, go and study while I make you some delicious food." Ji-hyun, on the other hand, was all alone. Her father was away on a business trip, so she had no one to tell about her hardships. She called Eun Woo and he asked her to come over to his place. There she met Eun Woo's mother, but she was in shock. Her father had her picture in his wallet. How did they know each other? She made no mention about it, because they had more important things at present. Ji-hyun's father arrives home, just to find out what was going on with her. He knew exactly who was behind it all. Meanwhile, just as Eun Woo deciphers the files, in the school library the headmaster orchestrates a school lockdown under the pretense of a security breach. Eun Woo and Ji-hyun narrowly escape being caught and manage to upload the evidence to a public server. The information went viral only in a couple of minutes, forcing the district authorities to look in the matter. They discovered that the real mastermind behind the anonymous messages in the bulletin board was the head of the school board, not the headmaster. The board had been profiting from the corrupt system for years, and they had been blackmailing Ji-hyun's fathers with a file from 31 years ago. He was threatened to be exposed for school violence and the death of a classmate. The viral message: the truth. The orphan's shadow. It was a rainy evening in the quiet outskirts of Seoul, 31 years ago. The streets were wet and glistening, reflecting the lights that flickered from nearby signs. A small orphanage stood at the end of a narrow alley, its walls cracked from years of neglect. Inside, young Han Joon, only known as Joon, sat by the window, staring out at the world he could never be part of. At just 12 years old, Joon had already learned that life wasn't fair. Orphaned after his parents died in a car accident, he was left with nothing but the cold, sterile walls of the orphanage. No family to call his own, no future to look forward to. He dreamed of a different life, one filled with power, wealth, and status. But that dream always felt too far out of reach. The children at the orphanage mocked him, the way they did with all the boys who didn't fit in. Joon wasn't strong enough to defend himself, and his quiet nature made him an easy target. But Joon was no fool. He knew that the world outside the orphanage was even more unforgiving. If he wanted to survive, he needed to change. He watched the rich kids from the neighboring school, dressed in expensive uniforms, and admired their power. They didn't have to fight for respect. They simply took it. One boy in particular, Miho, stood out. Miho was the leader of a group of bullies. His gang ruled the school, and Joon longed to be part of their world. One afternoon, when the orphanage boys were out collecting firewood in the forest, Joon saw his chance. Miho and his gang were sitting by a riverbank, laughing loudly as they tossed rocks into the water. Joon approached them hesitantly, his heart racing. He knew what he had to do. "Hey," Joon said, his voice barely audible but steady. "I want to join you." Miho looked him up and down, sizing him up. The other boys snickered, waiting for Miho's verdict. The leader stood up, towering over Joon with a smirk. "You want to join us?" Miho asked. "Why?" "I can help you. I'm good at finding things. I know people, and I can be useful," Joon replied, trying to sound confident. Miho considered it for a moment. There was something about the way Joon spoke, the way his eyes burned with determination, that intrigued him. "All right," Miho said. "You'll prove yourself. Don't mess this up." Over the next few months, Joon became part of Miho's gang. He did their bidding, spying on teachers, stealing from stores, and intimidating weaker students. But the power felt good, and soon, he was no longer the quiet orphan. He was someone to be feared, someone to be respected. But Joon's involvement with the gang came with a price. The deeper he sank into their world, the harder it was to escape. They were dangerous, not just to those they bullied, but to each other. Miho became increasingly violent, using his power to torment others for sport. Joon had hoped to rise above the chaos, but instead, he found himself trapped in it. It wasn't long before things took a dark turn. One day, they targeted a boy named Jean, a quiet, bright student who had always stayed out of their way. Jean had never been part of their world, and he was an easy target for Miho's gang. On the day of Jin's death, the gang had decided to teach him a lesson. They cornered him near the school's old shed, taunting him and threatening him with their fists. Joon stood on the sidelines, his heart pounding as he watched the others close in on Jean. But when Jean fell to the ground, gasping for breath, something shifted inside him. The boy's fear-filled eyes locked with Joon's, and for the first time, Joon saw the real cost of the world he had chosen. "Stop! He's had enough!" Joon shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the others' laughter. Miho turned to Joon with a menacing grin. "Don't be weak, Joon. This is how you survive. This is how you rise." Joon didn't have the strength to stop them. That night, Jean was found dead in the woods, the cause of his death ruled as an accident. But Joon knew better. He could never escape the image of Jin's lifeless body, nor the weight of his role in it. In the years that followed, Joon changed his name to Han Joon and distanced himself from the gang. He worked hard to build a life for himself, using the skills he learned in the streets to climb the social ladder. He became a powerful businessman, admired by many, but the ghosts of his past always haunted him. The death of Jean was a secret he carried with him, one that shaped his ambition and his fear of vulnerability. The web of blackmail and corruption. The anonymous messages. Miho's returned to the school board by blackmailing the principal, and had absolute control over the school grounds. He sent anonymous, hurtful messages, targeting students for their parents to pay him for silence, particularly to Ji-hyun because she was Joon, now Chairman Han Joon's daughter. At first, it seemed like the work of a disgruntled student or a random cyberbully. But as the messages escalated, they weren't just cruel, they were targeted, calculated. Each one seemed to aim at undermining and exploiting vulnerabilities of the students and pushing them to the brink of despair. The blackmail. As the investigation into the messages deepens, the authorities discovers that several faculty members, including some high-ranking ones, have been blackmailed into silence. Students have been coerced into hiding evidence, and certain teachers have been threatened with career-destroying secrets. The ties that bind these acts of corruption lead back to Miho. His hands are all over it. The connection with Ji-hyun's father. The investigation also revealed the dark link between Miho and Ji-hyun's father's past. Miho, who had been part of the same group of bullies as her father, knew June well, perhaps better than anyone. When Ji-hyun's father rose to power, Miho kept silence, only waiting for an opportunity to get all the money he could out of him. It was Miho who had helped orchestrate the cover-up of Jin's death, ensuring that the boy's murder was brushed under the rug. He was the oldest of the gang and declared that they were elsewhere, and nowhere around the crime scene. He never spoke about that issue except to coerce money out of other gang members who had made it in life, others like Chairman Han Joon. But now, Miho's corruption had come full circle. The death. The teacher who secretly left the files and the encrypted message behind was murdered by Miho in order to silence her. After the investigations, Miho was sentenced to 25 years in jail. While Chairman Han got off with a warning, there was no evidence to prove his involvement in Jin's death. Ji-hyun eventually put the pieces together about the connection between her father and Eun Woo's mother. She discovered that Eun Woo was her brother. She spoke to her father, and for the first time he looked her in the eye with love. He did not know about Eun Woo's existence, but he embraced him as his own. Ji-hyun's heart raced as she looked at Eun Woo. Her voice trembled as she spoke, barely able to comprehend the words she was about to say. "Eun Woo," she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. We're siblings." Eun Woo looked at her, his face paling as he took her hand, his eyes looking at her in disbelief. We are?" he asked, his voice soft, as if in denial. But as his gaze met Ji-hyun's, something in his heart shifted. He had always felt a pull towards her, a connection he couldn't explain, and now, everything made sense. Chairman Han Joon stood beside his daughter and quietly explained how he and Eun Woo's mother were together for a brief period of time, but broke up because he married Ji-hyun's mother. He had no idea that Eun Woo was his son. Finally they became a strange but close family.